Hello. It is Wednesday, April 22nd. We are finishing Lamb to the Slaughter, the second part of it today. So, a little recap of what we read on Monday. So, we have Mary Maloney and Patrick Maloney, and they are happily married, or so we are led to believe at the very, very beginning. Mary is at home. She's pregnant. She's like, wow, I love this man so much. This is amazing. And then he comes home and he starts being real weird and he tells her he's leaving her. And she goes into total shock and is like, "No, I'm gonna cook you dinner anyway because you need to eat something. This is all a dream." Blah blah blah. She goes downstairs, gets a frozen leg of lamb, comes up, and then hits him in the head because he says he's going out. He's like, "For God's sake, woman!" Blah blah blah, and then she smacks him and kills him. And so we have a lot of irony in there because she is so sweet and cutesy and calm and gentle at the very beginning, and then she suddenly murders her husband. Okay? So we're picking up there where she had just been talking to herself in the mirror, like rehearsing what she was going to say when she goes to the grocery store. So we don't know what she's planning yet, but we're about to find out. So open your thing and let's get started. All right. So she's at the grocery store now. "Hello, Sam," she said brightly, smiling at the man behind the counter. "Why, good evening, Mrs. Maloney. How are you?" "I want some potatoes, please, Sam. Yes, and I think a can of peas." The man turned and reached up behind him on the shelf for the peas. So we saw her rehearsing this part in her mirror. Okay. "Patrick's decided he's tired and doesn't want to eat out tonight," she told him. "We usually go out on Thursdays, and now he's caught me without any vegetables in the house." "Then how about meat, Mrs. Maloney?" "No, I've got meat, thanks. A nice leg of lamb from the freezer." We're going to pause right there because that is actually a really good example of verbal irony because even though she doesn't really know that she's being sarcastic, she is being very, very ironic and saying, like, no, 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 don't worry, I've got meat because she just murdered her husband with it. All right. "Oh, I don't much like cooking it frozen, Sam, but I'm taking a chance on it this time. You think it'll be all right?" "Personally," the grocer said, "I don't believe it makes any difference. You want these Idaho potatoes?" "Oh, yes, that'll be fine, 2 of those." "Anything else?" The grocer cocked his head on one side, looking at her pleasantly. "How about afterwards? What are you going to give him for afterwards?" "Well, what would you suggest, Sam?" The man glanced around his shop. "How about a nice big slice of cheesecake? I know he likes that." "Perfect," she said. "He loves it." And when it was all wrapped and she had paid, she put on her brightest smile and said, "Thank you, Sam. Good night." "Good night, Mrs. Maloney, and thank you." And now, she told herself as she hurried back, all she was doing now, she was returning home to her husband, and he was waiting for his supper. And she must cook it good and make it as tasty as possible because the poor man was tired. And if, when she entered the house, she happened to find anything unusual or tragic or terrible, then naturally it would be a shock and she'd become frantic with grief and horror. So pause for a second. She already killed her husband, so this is now like a creation of an alibi. Like she went to the store and now she's going to pretend that she's finding him. And she's like, "Oh, and if something happens to be there, I guess I'll be scared." All right. Mind you, she wasn't expecting to find anything. She was just going home with the vegetables. Mrs. Patrick Maloney going home with the vegetables on Thursday evening to cook supper for her husband. That's the way, she told herself. Do everything right and natural. Keep things absolutely natural, and there'll be no reason for any acting at all. Therefore, when she entered the kitchen by the back door, she was humming a little tune to herself and smiling. So we can also infer there that she's like convinced herself of this too. "Patrick," she called, "how are you doing, darling?" She put the parcel down on the table and went through into the living room. And when she saw him lying there on the floor with his legs doubled up and one arm twisted beneath his body, it really was rather a shock. All the old love and longing for him welled up inside of her, and she ran over to him, knelt down beside him, and began to cry her heart out. It was easy, no acting was necessary. A few minutes later she got up and went to the phone. She knew the number of the police station, and when the man at the other end answered, she cried to him, "Quick, come quick! Patrick's dead!" "Who's speaking?" "Mrs. Maloney, Mrs. Patrick Maloney." "You mean Patrick Maloney's dead?" "I think so," she sobbed. "He's lying on the floor, and I think he's dead." "Be right over," the man said. The car came very quickly, and when she opened the front door, 2 policemen walked in. She knew them both. She knew nearly all the men at the precinct, and she fell right into Jack Noonan's arms, weeping hysterically. He put her gently into a chair and then went over to join the other one, who was called O'Malley, kneeling by the body. "Is he dead?" she cried. So right here we start seeing all this dramatic irony because we already know everything that's actually happened, but we're going to see it from the other perspectives of different characters, which is really going to create that dramatic irony. So make sure that you're paying attention to that as we go forward. I'm afraid he is. What happened? Briefly, she told her story about going out to the grocer and coming back to find him on the floor. While she was talking, crying, and talking, Noonan discovered a small patch of congealed blood on the dead man's head. He showed it to O'Malley, who got up at once and hurried to the phone. Soon other men began to come into the house, first a doctor, then 2 detectives, one of whom she knew by name. Later, a police photographer arrived and took pictures, and a man who knew about fingerprints. There was a great deal of whispering and muttering beside the corpse, and the detectives kept asking her a lot of questions, but they always treated her kindly. She told her story again, this time right from the beginning, when Patrick had come in and she was sewing, and he was tired, so tired, he hadn't wanted to go out for supper. He told how she'd put the meat in the oven, it's there now, cooking, and how she'd slipped out to the grocer for vegetables and come back to find him lying on the floor. So, do you think that they think of her as a suspect right now? Like she's coming off as this, she's very gentle, she's very sweet. They all knew her too because he was a cop, and she's just this helpless little woman. So they're being super, super sweet to her, probably because they don't suspect her. Which grocer? One of the detectives asked. She told him, and he turned and whispered something to the other detective, who immediately went outside into the street. In 15 minutes, he was back with a page of notes, and there was more whispering, and through her sobbing, she heard a few of whispered phrases. Acted quite normal, very cheerful, wanted to give him a good supper, peas, cheesecake, impossible that she. After a while, the photographer and the doctor departed, and 2 other men came in and took the corpse away on a stretcher. Then the fingerprint man went away. The 2 detectives remained, and so did the 2 policemen. They were exceptionally nice to her, and Jack Noonan asked if she wouldn't rather go somewhere else, to her sister's house perhaps, or to his own wife, who would take care of her and put her up for the night. No, she said, she didn't feel she could move even a yard at the moment. Would they mind awfully if she just stayed where she was until she felt better? She didn't feel too good at the moment. She really didn't. Then hadn't she better lie down on the bed? Jack Noonan asked. No, she said. She'd like to stay right where she was in this chair. A little later, perhaps, when she felt better, she would move. So think for a second, why else is she not moving? Is it really because she's like, oh, I can't bear the thought? Or is she like, she's trying to keep eyes on everything? So they left her there while they went about their business, searching the house. Occasionally, one of the detectives asked her another question. Sometimes Jack Noonan spoke to her gently as he passed by. Her husband, he told her, had been killed by a blow on the back of the head administered with a heavy, blunt instrument, almost certainly a large piece of metal. There's some dramatic irony because we know it wasn't metal. They were looking for the weapon. The murderer may have taken it with him, but on the other hand, he may have thrown it away or hidden it somewhere on the premises. It's the old story, he said. Get the weapon and you've got the man. Also ironic. Later, one of the detectives came up and sat beside her. Did she know, he asked, of anything in the house that could have been used as a weapon? Would she mind having a look around to see if anything was missing? A very big spanner, for example, or a heavy metal vase. They didn't have any heavy metal vases, she said. Or a big spanner? She didn't think they had one, but there might be some things like that in the garage. The search went on. She knew that there were other policemen in the garden all around the house. She could hear their footsteps on the gravel outside, and sometimes she saw the flash of a torch through the chink in the curtains. It began to get late, nearly 9, she noticed by the clock on the mantel. The 4 men searching the room seemed to be growing weary, a trifle exasperated. They're getting stressed out, like, what is this? We can't figure it out. Jack, she said, the next time Sergeant Noonan went by, would you mind giving me a drink? Sure, I'll give you a drink. You mean this whiskey? Yes, please, but just a small one. It might make me feel better. He handed her the glass. Why don't you have one yourself? She said. You must be awfully tired. Please do. You've been very good to me. Well, he answered, it's not strictly allowed, but I might just take a drop to keep me going. One by one, the others came in and were persuaded to take a little sip of whiskey, so think about what she's doing here. They stood around rather awkwardly with the drinks in their hands, uncomfortable in her presence, trying to say consoling things to her. Sergeant Noonan wandered into the kitchen, came out quickly, and said, Look, Mrs. Maloney, you know that oven of yours is still on, and the meat still inside. Oh, dear me, she cried, so it is. I better turn it off for you, hadn't I? Will you do that, Jack? Thank you so much. When the sergeant returned the second time, she looked at him with her large, dark, tearful eyes. Jack Noonan, she said. Yes? Would you do me a small favor, you and these others? We can try, Mrs. Maloney. Well, she said, here you all are, and good friends of dear Patrick's too, and hoping to catch the man who killed him. You must be terribly hungry by now, because it's long past your supper time, and I know Patrick would never forgive me, God bless his soul, if I allowed you to remain in his house without offering you decent hospitality. Why don't you eat up the lamb that's in the oven? It'll be cooked just right by now. Wouldn't dream of it, Sergeant Noonan said. Please, she begged, please eat it. Personally, I couldn't touch a thing. Certainly not what's been in the house while he was here. But it's all right for you. It'd be a favor to me if you'd eat it up. Then you can go on with your work again afterwards. There was a good deal of hesitating among the four policemen, but they were clearly hungry, and in the end they were persuaded to go into the kitchen and help themselves. The woman stayed where she was, listening to them through the open door, and she could hear them speaking among themselves, their voices thick and sloppy because their mouths were full of meat. So a lot of dramatic irony here because we know that they are eating what? The weapon. Have some more, Charlie? No, better not finish it. She wants us to finish it. She said so. Be doing her a favor. Okay, then, give me some more. That's a hell of a big club the guy must have used to hit poor Patrick, one of them was saying. The doc says his skull was smashed all to pieces, just like from a sledgehammer. That's why it ought to be easy to find. Exactly what I say. Whoever done it, they're not going to be carrying a thing like that around with them longer than they need, one of them belched. Personally, I think it's right here on the premises. Probably right under our very noses. What do you think, Jack? And in the other room, Mary Maloney began to giggle. So, on here, it doesn't show it on my screen, but there's going to be the link to your exit slip. Make sure that you're thinking about irony. So this is being told in the third person limited point of view, and we're mostly getting Mary's perspective. But we do get to see some of the other perspectives here just from their dialogue that kind of get woven in. And so that creates a lot of dramatic irony because we know so much that these detectives don't know. So as you are doing your exit slip, again, for those short answer ones, you have to make sure you write in complete sentences. We are in 8th grade. You are supposed to be going to high school in a month. 3 words that are not coherently tied together is not an appropriate answer. Okay, you can type a whole sentence. You're capable of doing it. So please make sure you do that. Reach out to me if you have any questions. I will get your graded exit slips from Monday back to you shortly. So hopefully you can kind of look at those. Make sure that you are keeping up and let me know if you have any questions. All right. Goodbye.